of the BioHub. Today, I'm joined by Alexander Zehnder, CEO of CureVac, a company that has been at the forefront of mRNA technology for 25 years. Alexander took over as CEO in 2023, leading CureVac through a major transformation, including a $1.45 billion partnership with GSK and a bold strategic pivot. With a background in medicine and a global career spanning Roche, Genentech and Sanofi, he's an industry leader shaping the future of mRNA vaccines and therapeutics. Today, we'll dive into CureVac's 25-year journey and the next frontier of mRNA innovation, and how Alexander is driving cultural change to position CureVac for long-term success. Pleasure to have you. Let's get into it a little bit. But first of all, how are you, Alexander?
I'm very well. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Amazing to have you. Definitely. So you took over as CEO in 2023. Just first of all, what drew you to CureVac, and what excited you most about leading the company at such a pivotal time?
Yeah, so when I joined CureVac in 2023, it felt like I was stepping into the next chapter of an extraordinary story. And for me, CureVac wasn't just another biotech company, it's a real pioneer in mRNA and the first company that really believed into the potential of mRNA for human medicines. And I will always imagine being part of a team that believed in mRNA back in 2000, that when most people thought it was just fragile or impractical to use it for medicine. So that kind of bold vision and determination what drew me to CureVac. And, in particular, there were three key things. One is I was really fascinated by the technology, mRNA, and what it can do with it, and CureVac being of the forefront of this groundbreaking science and really have the potential to really transform medicine. Two, CureVac is a real pioneer in this space. As you mentioned, this year we have our 25th anniversary, and I'm sure we can talk about this a bit more, and really being one of the first companies that really believed in the potential of mRNA and with this legacy of innovation. And the company has really some of the world's leading scientists in this area. So being part of that and trying to help the company to get to the next stage was really very fascinating. Which brings me to the third element. I really saw potential in CureVac that wasn't yet developed. And maybe with my experience, from being 20 years plus in global organization, I felt I could bring something to the company to really unleash that potential and continue this legacy of pioneering and mRNA innovation. So those were the key three factors, I would say, that brought me to the company almost 2 years ago. And I would say 2 years later, I'm still equally energized and convinced that the potential is there. And, there are great things ahead for this company.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, like I say, it's a bit of an important time. You guys also turned 25 this year. You just mentioned that. Let's just talk about the journey, CureVac's journey, that is, from pioneering mRNA to becoming a global biotech leader.
Yes, as you said, it's an amazing. It's for me, if I would summarize it in one sentence, it's kind of a quarter of a century of journey of resilience and innovation against the odds. CureVac started in 2000, was a spin-off of the university from here in Tübingen. The first CEO was Ingmar Hör, right? That really believed in this potential of mRNA, and with mRNA you could trigger protein production in the human body, which was a very radical idea at the time. In 2006, they built the first GMP facility for mRNA. So way before anybody would think that this could ever work. And skeptics at the time called this actually fringe science. And, Ingmar told me the story at the time that some of the management team mortgaged their homes at the time to finance some of the early operations. So really true entrepreneurs kind of started in a garage being a little lab in a university building. So really amazing story. Then over the next few years, they really developed a platform. So from 2010 to 2020, really developing the platform. Actually, in 2013, they hosted the first mRNA conference, international conference here in Tübingen, where our headquarters is. In 2015, a collaboration with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the development of prophylactic vaccine. 2017, actually the first ever human proof of concept study in a rabies vaccine published in a journal, which was kind of a landmark trial for mRNA vaccine development. So all of that way before COVID, and of course all the visibility that came with COVID. 2020 was a really pivotal year. CureVac did an IPO at the Nasdaq in August of 2020, raising $245 million at the time, and as well, kind of coinciding with the rise of the COVID pandemic, initiated development of its own mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine. 21 was, a year of quite major setback. Actually, as our first phase 3 trial showed efficacy, but it wasn't enough to really be competitive, which then led to a massive pivot of the organization, and the organization really jumped on the next generation of vaccine. And it's an amazing sign of resilience, not giving up, and really believing in the more long-term vision. It also marked the start of a collaboration with GSK at the time. And then really following that, it was a journey of reinvention. 22, 23, we showed that our second generation backbone works. We brought it into the clinic with GSK, led to positive phase 2 data, led to further revision of the collaboration with GSK. So really an amazing story of really innovation against the odds, a story of resilience. And 25 years later, we are still here, and we are thriving and are well positioned, hopefully, to go to the next 25 years.
Yeah, and I like that you didn't necessarily go to all just the positive milestones throughout that, and you mentioned some of the challenges you faced and how you've overcome them, because that's a lot about what this industry is about. It's never smooth sailing. It's there's always challenges to face and come through. I'm sure you've had them not just at CureVac, but also just like in your career in general.
Yeah, no, totally. I always say biotech is not for the faint-hearted, and it's never a linear journey, right? It's always an up and down. And I think the important thing is that failure is always inevitable in our industry. The key is that you learn from it, that you are agile, react quickly, and adapt and move on. And we have multiple examples of this in CureVac for sure.
Yeah, and one of the latter things in terms of milestones was that GSK partnership, which obviously is a major moment for you guys last year. How does that then shape the future of CureVac, and also from an mRNA vaccine development perspective, how does it shape that?
Yeah, sure. So actually, the GSK partnership started back in 2020. This was our first partnership with GSK, really for the development of vaccines based on mRNA technology. And then that partnership over these last few years evolved over time. And, I think it's a really good example of a very fruitful partnership between a small biotech that has great technology and a big pharma company, GSK, being a leader in the vaccine space. And if these two companies put their respective strengths together, so our strengths on technology and manufacturing of mRNA, and then, of course, GSK being a global powerhouse in vaccine development, and really putting it both together. And it was really fruitful for us, because without the GSK collaboration, we would have never been able to develop our technology and validate it the way we've done this. So, and then the collaboration, as I mentioned, started in 2020, and then it evolved over time, then resulting on the heels or on the back of two positive phase 2 trials in COVID and flu of this next, agreement that we did with GSK last year, which was a significant deal for us in terms of financing, but also in terms of validating our platform. And it was a really clarifying deal in many ways, as well as it allowed us to really refocus CureVac, the company, on what we really should be good at and strong at, which is research, technology, and early innovation, and then let GSK do what they're best at, which is kind of bring the programs over the finish line, and then hopefully file it and run the phase 3 trials, do the filings, and then commercialize the product. So it was a really good clarifying event for us, provided stability from a financial point of view, validating our platform, and really helping us to reshape and refocus on what we are good at and what we should be doing.
Yeah, you talk about like that reshape, that refocus. You guys have gone through quite a bit of a strategic pivot in a few ways. Just curious, like what led to that decision, and also how has it then positioned the company for the long-term success?
Yeah, I think when you lead a company, as I have the privilege of leading a team and being the CEO of the company, I think every company reaches a moment where it has to ask itself, okay, what kind of company do you want to be? What are you really good at? What do we want to be known for? Right? And that, following this license agreement with GSK, that was such a moment for us, and where we took the ability to, okay, let's reforce the company, let's reforce on research, technology, early development. Let's deprioritize late stage manufacturing and late stage development, because somebody else, our partner, can do this much better for us. So it's really kind of looking at the environment around us. How is the field evolving? What are we really good at? And really focusing back on this. And then, as I mentioned, on the heels of 2 positive phase 2 data, that was just the right timing for us to do this. Right. So it is really around planning, about strategy, around trying to focus, and that was basically the background of what we did, and really focusing on oncology and infectious diseases, which are 2 areas where we believe mRNA as a technology has great promise.
Yeah, what's the decision-making process like for a company like you guys to go through a pivot like that? It must, as a CEO, going through that process must be pretty difficult in a number of ways. So,
of course, there are a few elements that go around this. There is, of course, a financial element in looking at, how we financed, how much cash do we have, how long is that cash reach, and what can we best do with this. There is a pipeline element as well to look, okay, where do we believe mRNAs as a technology is uniquely suited to address an issue that is maybe more different or difficult to address with other technologies. There is, of course, an environment around us to see how is the environment evolving. mRNA in 2025 is very different than mRNA in 2020. It's more mature, there are more players out there, more services. So all of these elements go then into kind of shaping, okay, what is best for us, what makes sense from a financial point of view, from a pipeline point of view, from a shareholder point of view. So there's lots of different elements that go into this. Of course, lots of intense discussion between the management team, with the employees, and of course with our board as well. So it's a mixture of all of these that go into these kind of decisions, because these decisions that we are making, some of them have quite significant implications for our employees. So you better make sure you take into account all these different elements before making such a strategic pivot as we just did.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then we talk about it a little bit, but every biotech faces challenges for its growth. And then you mentioned that moment back in 21, with that phase 3 data. Just talk through that moment, but also like some of the other toughest moments for CureVac and the lessons that have been learned in overcoming them.
Yeah, it was before my time, but even in my previous, professional life, I was in a situation like this. And imagine CureVac at the time, 2021, at the height of the pandemic, a company really with a strong mission to try to save the world, literally, with people around us suffering and dying, and then getting the readout from this phase 3 trial, showing that, the drug worked, but efficacy was only 47%, which was below what we expected. And it was really heartbreaking and a really, gut punch for everybody involved. But here is what I like most about this company is, of course, after the shock, has been done. The company looked, okay, what can we do? We still believe in our mission. There was a really rigorous kind of post-mortem analysis of what happens. We identified quickly kind of the mistakes were made or the tweaks that we need to do with our platform, and then we stand up and go on and fight another war, in terms of finding better medicine to move forward. So there's a huge lessons of resilience. You don't grow by avoiding failure, you grow by learning from it, and that's kind of the spirit. And always try to take something positive out of a failure, even though it's not easy, of course, and it takes some time. But it was a great learning experience, and people still talk about it, up to these days. So that was that.
That's good that they don't shy away from that conversation. I think that's really good. And then the other aspect, in terms of like tough culturally and things like that, is the fairly recent layoffs, and like what factors led to that restructuring, and how has that decision come in terms of looking at CureVac's long-term vision and all of that?
Yeah, the restructuring was somewhat linked to the new GSK agreement, right? Because it was a significant change for us, as in the previous GSK agreements, we had options to co-commercialize as well in some of the countries, and we had options to manufacture some of the commercial supply. And of course, with the new agreement, we kind of stepped back from this to really refocus the company, as I said before. And of course, that has implication, and of course, what kind of organization do you need? So we didn't no longer need a lot of the functions, all the people working on commercial manufacturing, or folks working even on the COVID and flu GSK programs. So that was part of it. We also decided to step out of a pandemic agreement that we have with the German government at some time. So there were definitely some clear external factors that led to then us needing to adapt the structure as well. I think part of it as well, it's CureVac as a company grew really, really quickly. Grew from just a few hundred people to over 1,000 people in these 3 years across the pandemic. And in hindsight, probably too much growth that we really couldn't integrate really, really well. So it's a mixture of real milestones happening and kind of, changing the strategic direction of the company, which of course then has implications on the organization you need, but also to some extent addressing some of the inefficiencies that were built over time as a result of this really rapid growth. So of course these decisions are always difficult, but necessary, for us to. And maybe another point that is really important, we also did it on the back of some significant financing from the GSK deal, which might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm a big believer that if you need to make tough decisions, it's much better to do it out of a position of strength. And even before you absolutely need to do this, because if you wait too long and then you have the back against the wall, it's even harder. So all of that came kind of together. Yes, it was a big change for the organization. But what I would say is the organization took it. They understood why we do this. I actually didn't meet any of our employees that said that doesn't make sense. Many said, hey, finally, somebody comes and do something about it. So, even though it's hard, of course, but we supported our employees. But what was important to me is to really explain, well, why we are doing this, why now, and then take the organization on a journey with this. And then, of course, be responsible employers, do our best, be generous with the employees that had to leave us. And now we're almost through, or we are through actually with that, it was a necessary, thing to do. And I'm quite pleased how it turned out at the end.
Yeah, and there's most of the people who listen to my podcast and most of the guests I've had on the US side. Do you know like how much it differs doing something, a bit of restructuring like this in Germany as opposed to like the US?
It is very different. In my career, I spent 8 years in the US as well. I spent time in Italy and in Switzerland and in Spain as well. And it is different. I would say the US is definitely easier to do kind of a large scale restructuring because you don't have so many other stakeholders, let's say, that you need to consider. In Germany, for example, it's quite heavily regulated, right? It's quite heavily unionized as well. So a lot more discussions are needed with different stakeholders inside of the company. We have union representatives inside of the company. So this needs to be all agreed, this kind of big restructuring. So it is definitely more complex. But knowing this, I had the pleasure and I had the fortunate to have a very experienced team with me, also very experienced HR teams that have done these kind of things before, that knew what are kind of the intricacies, let's say, in the German context. And of course, you always need to take into account the local context. What are kind of the legal ramifications? What is the setup that you need to go through to make sure you don't make mistakes, right? So you always need to adapt, of course, the strategy according to the local legal situation and the local customs as well, which we did here as well. But we knew that all from the get-go, what needed to be done in order to be compliant and relatively smooth, I would say. But there are definitely massive differences, between different countries that you will need to take into account, and just to copy paste, from one country to the other definitely does not work. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, just the different systems around the world, and you kind of have to abide by them. And then you mentioned it a little bit, at the start of this question, but the cultural aspect, and it's obviously something you're really passionate about. Um, how are you leading the cultural change at CureVac, and also why is it so important to the company's future?
Yeah, I'm really a strong believer that culture and strategy need to go together in order to really transform a company. And I wrote a LinkedIn post not so long ago. There's this famous saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? But I said then yes, culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. It adds to it at CureVac. And what it means that even if you have the best strategy in place, if you don't adapt your values, if you don't adapt how you behave, how you lead, right, you will never get that strategy really into action. And that's what it means. So when I joined CureVac in 2023, I knew that transforming the company wasn't just about restructuring operations or clarifying strategy or providing a vision. It was also about building a culture that could sustain that transformation over time. So what we're trying to do really, that CureVac, that strategy and culture work together. So when we came in, we did a whole exercise. We did a survey inside the company to see what's working, what's not working well, what's resonating with the current values that we had. And as a result of this, we came up with our CARE value, which is collaboration, accountability, results orientation, experimentation. And that's kind of at the core of what we do. And this is kind of how we put it in practice. By collaboration, we really talking about teamwork, but teamwork not just within the team, but teamwork really across a matrix organization, across different parts of the organization, and really this notion about we succeed or fail as one team. Accountability we saw was lacking as part of the survey, so this is something that we reinforced, meaning that you do what you say, you own your decision, you keep your promises. We hold ourselves and others accountable and responsible for delivering results. Results orientation, I wanted to bring more of this results mindset and a little bit more of a commercial mindset into the organization that historically was very research driven. So results orientation in a sense of that we stay focused, that we have few but strategic goals, we have priorities, individual priorities that are aligned with the overarching goals. And I wanted to bring this kind of sense of urgency in the company. And then the last one is experimentation, trying new things, not being afraid to fail, having a bold thinking, and also this notion of continuous learning. So we kind of narrowed it down to 4. When I came, we had 7 or 8 of these values, but we narrowed it down to 4. And then we roll it out in workshops and so on and so forth. So I hope that kind of culture and the values and how we behave, and with the strategy going together or being focused. So I hope we're about 1 year in, so far so good. But I think it's really key that we align the two, because otherwise I don't think it can work.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the hardest thing is distilling those values across the company, and especially for a company of your size, it can be quite difficult. The way it sounds like you're doing it is through like workshops and continuously repeating and like checking each other on those values, making sure you're always aligned, those kind of things.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, sometimes values, it can be a bit fluffy and a bit not so well defined what we mean. But what we're talking about, really, we translate values into behaviors, because behaviors is something you can observe, you can talk about, you can measure to some extent as well. So that's how we translate values into behaviors. And then we talk about these care behaviors. And then, we do surveys over time to see the progress that we're making. We also take these values to, promote people. For example, we take that into account that when we do our yearly employee conversations. So really, we fit it into overall how we look at performance and how we look at how we work together.
Yeah, amazing. Look, it's been a pleasure having you on, Alexander. That's just my last question, which I ask to every guest. I don't know how much thought you've had a chance to put into this, but if you could have dinner with any scientist or innovator, past or present, who would it be and why?
I was thinking about it. There are many people that came to mind, but at the end I honed into one person that has made a real impact on our field, the field of mRNA. Her name is Kathleen Carrico. She's the 2023 Nobel Prize laureate for physiology and medicine, and really one of the pioneers of the mRNA technology. I have the pleasure to meet her personally, a few times, and it's not so much about winning the Nobel Prize, but her story is very remarkable and kind of links a lot to the story of CureVac, as it's a story of resilience. She's a medical doctor. She began her career in Hungary under modest circumstances, moved to the US, and in the US had a really succession of failures. She tells these stories where she loses funding, is fired from her lab, has to go back, and then the breakthrough came relatively late in her career, where she made a real breakthrough in terms of understanding how mRNA vaccines could be further improved, and then which led to the Nobel Prize. So it's a real story of resilience, kind of being the underdog, but having a vision and not giving up, which reminded me a lot of what we are trying to do at CureVac. So that came to mind. And, if I would have dinner with her, definitely I would want to know how she did this, this kind of staying focused, coming back stronger from defeat and from low points, right? So I was thinking about Kathleen for all those reasons.
I love that. A real story of resilience and that kind of underdog mentality. Yeah, I love that. But yeah, absolute pleasure to have you on, Alexander. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise, thank you so much.
And everyone, please like and subscribe to the BioHub. Thanks again.